He married her in a bare room with no one there who mattered. And for 6 years, Emmerich Castellane kept her name out of every mouth in the city. 3 nights before his own family would raise their glasses to his engagement to another woman. A single place card at the head of the table appeared in handwriting no one at the estate could explain. When he saw the way the letters leaned, the way only one hand in the world had ever shaped them, the wine turned to ash against his tongue. What unfolded at that final gathering did not simply collapse an alliance sealed in blood. It ended a dynasty, and it began with a name he had spent 6 years refusing to speak aloud. The tailor's chalk hissed across the shoulder of Emmerich's jacket, and he did not move. He stood on the low-fitting platform in the east gallery of the Castellane estate, arms held out from his sides, like a man being measured for something other than a suit. The mirror in front of him ran floor to ceiling, edged in tarnished silver, and the reflection it gave back was a study in control. A lean man in charcoal wool, dark hair cut close, a jaw that had learned long ago never to betray what moved behind it. The jacket had been let out under the left arm to hide the holster he wore, even here, even now, especially now. "You're breathing again," Renata said from the chaise behind him. She had a low, unhurried voice, the kind that never rose, because it had never once needed to. She sat with her ankles crossed, and a tablet balanced on her knee, scrolling through a guest manifest she had already memorized. Her dark hair was coiled at the nape of her neck, without a single strand loose. She was by every measure the world used, a beautiful woman. And looking at her stirred in Emmerich roughly what he felt, looking at a well-kept ledger. Admiration for the order of it. Nothing warmer. The chalk marks smear when you expand your chest like that, she went on. Present a little discipline for the man. He's an artist. He's a tailor, Emmerich said. He's the only one in 3 cities who can drape a jacket over a sidearm and make it look like grief instead of hardware. Hold still. He held still. Down the length of the gallery, past the cold marble and the tall arrangements of white orchids, the staff refreshed twice a day. A pair of Renata's people were arguing in undertones about the seating for the betrothal dinner, who could be placed beside whom without reopening a feud that predated them both. The estate smelled the way it always did: beeswax, lily, gun oil, old money kept too clean. Emmerich had grown up inside that smell. Lately it made the back of his throat ache. 3 days. In 3 days the 2 families would gather in the long hall beneath the portraits of men who had died badly, and the Castellanes and the Voss would toast an engagement that everyone at the table understood was not a romance but a border treaty. Renata Voss would wear something the color of frost. Her father would embrace Emmerich like a son, and count the exits while he did it. And the northern freight lines would fold quietly into the Castellane River terminals, and 2 syndicates that had been bleeding each other for a generation would become, on paper, one. It was a good arrangement. It was clean. Emmerich had negotiated harder deals over less. He simply could not make himself feel anything about it at all. "Your uncle wants the toast kept short," Renata said. "He thinks anything over 90 seconds looks like weakness." I told him my father will speak for 4 minutes, regardless of what anyone wants, so he should make peace with it now. He won't. No, she agreed, almost fond. He won't. The tailor stepped back, murmured something reverent, and began gathering his pins. Emmerich shrugged out of the half-finished jacket and handed it off without looking, and for a moment, one narrow, private moment, while Renata's attention was on her screen, his hand went to his trouser pocket and closed around the thing he carried there. A thin band of worn gold. No stone, no engraving that anyone but him would ever read. He had carried it against his hip every day for 6 years, and not once had it touched his hand in front of another living soul. He let go of it before the warmth of it could reach him. Emmerich. Renata was watching him now, head tilted. The guest manifest forgotten. "Where do you go?" "What? Sometimes you leave. Your face stays, but you leave." She said it without accusation, the way she might note, that a shipment was 3 crates light. It's the only thing about you I've never been able to price. I find it interesting. It's a long week, he said. It's a long life, she answered, and returned to her list. He crossed to the tall windows. Rain was coming. The sky over the river had gone, the color of a healing bruise, and the water below moved slowly and metal gray between the terminals his family had owned for 80 years. Somewhere across that river, past the freight yards and the shuttered cannery, and the streets where the lamps stayed broken because broken lamps kept the wrong people from looking too closely, there was a narrow house on Varon Lane, with a green door, and a woman inside it who was, in the eyes of the law and no one else, his wife. He had not seen her in 19 days. That was the arrangement they had built to keep her alive. Distance was the only gift he had ever been able to give her that his enemies couldn't take away. His phone buzzed once against his chest. A single line from Tobin, his oldest hand. The man who drove him and bled for him and asked no questions Emeric didn't invite. Someone's been asking around the cannery, about a house on Varon, about a woman. The rain reached the glass and began to run. He kept his face exactly where it was, the same still, unbothered mask that had carried him through every negotiation and every funeral of his adult life, and told himself, in the calm interior voice he trusted above all others, that it was nothing. A rumor, a rent collector. The city was always asking about someone. He slid the phone back into his coat without answering it. That was the first mistake. He would spend the rest of his life understanding exactly how large it was. Emeric's uncle found him an hour later in the study, because Ludovico Castellane always found him when there was something he wanted framed as advice. The study was the oldest room in the house, all dark shelves, and the low amber light of a single banker's lamp, and it smelled of pipe smoke that had soaked into the walls decades before Emeric was born. Ludovico poured 2 fingers of something dark from the decanter without asking, set one glass at Emeric's elbow, and lowered himself into the leather chair across the desk with the theatrical care of a man who wanted you to remember he was getting old. He was not that old, he simply found it useful. 3 days, Ludovico said, and lifted his glass an inch. After all this, your father, may he rest, would not have believed it. A Castellane and a Voss under one roof, and no one reaching for a knife. The night's still young, Emeric said. His uncle laughed, warm and dry. He had a good laugh. It had talked a great many men into rooms they never walked out of. You have his humor, not his patience. He would have spent 10 years on a piece like this. You did it in 18 months. He swirled the liquor. I'm proud of you. I don't say it enough. You say it whenever you're about to ask me for something. See that? Ludovico pointed at him, pleased. That's the patience arriving. Late, but arriving. He leaned back. The chair sighed. It's a small thing. Housekeeping, before the guests come. Renata's people have been thorough. God bless them. And in being thorough, they turned up a rumor. A woman. Somebody down by the old cannery has been paying attention to one of the empty houses on Varon Lane, asking neighbors questions, watching the door. The study was very quiet. Outside, the rain had settled into a steady, patient rhythm against the shutters. Emeric did not move. He had spent 34 years learning how not to move. Empty houses attract attention, he said. That's what they're for. That's what I said. Ludovico spread his hands. Reasonable, unbothered. But the Voss are nervous animals 3 days before a wedding, and a nervous animal that smells something it can't name will bolt. Corbin asked me directly. He wants to know there are no loose threads on our side of the river before he puts his daughter's hand in yours. So, he tipped his glass toward Emeric. Send someone quiet. Find out who the woman is. If she's nothing, a squatter, a widow, some poor soul with nowhere to go, we leave her be. If she's a Voss test, or worse, if she belongs to one of the families we cut out of this deal, then we know before she becomes a problem at the table. Clean it up, quietly. Tonight, if you can. Every instinct Emeric owned came awake at once. cold and total. The way they did in the half-second, before a room turned violent. His uncle was watching him over the rim of the glass. There was nothing in that watching he could name. No cruelty, no knowledge. Just the mild, expectant patience of a man asking for a favor he expected to be granted. He does not know, Emmerich told himself. He is asking me to erase my own wife and he does not know it, because no one knows. Because that is the entire point. Because I built a wall around her so high that not even the men who love me can see over it. The wall had held for 6 years. It would hold 3 more days. I'll handle it, Emmerich said. You'll send someone. I'll handle it myself. Ludovico's eyebrows lifted a fraction. That's beneath you. You have people for the cannery. I have people for a great many things I do myself anyway. Emmerich stood, and the movement closed the conversation the way a door closes. If Corbin Voss wants to hear from my own mouth that there's nothing across the river worth his nerves, then I'll go across the river and make sure my own mouth isn't lying. You want it clean, uncle. Clean is what I am for. Something moved behind Ludovico's eyes. Approval, maybe. Or the small private pleasure of a man who has steered a heavier man exactly where he meant to. He rose, crossed the room, and gripped Emmerich's shoulder with a hand that had signed death warrants and birthday cards in the same afternoon. Your father's son, he said warmly. Go tonight. Sleep easier. And Emmerich, he squeezed once. Whoever she turns out to be, don't let it cost you the sleep you need before Thursday. A woman by a cannery is not worth a boarder. Nothing is worth this boarder. Nothing, Emmerich agreed. He waited until his uncle's footsteps had faded down the hall, until the house had folded back into its polished silence, and then he stood alone in the smell of old smoke, with a full glass he had not touched, and told himself, one more time, in the voice he trusted above every other, that he was going to Varon Lane, simply to look. To confirm the rumor was smoke, to see the green door from the street, the way he sometimes let himself do when the distance grew unbearable, and then to drive home and lie to 2 syndicates with a clear conscience. She was fine. She was always fine. She was the most careful person he had ever known, and carefulness was the whole reason she was still breathing. He was still telling himself that when he took the back stairs to the garage, when he found Tobin already waiting by the dark car with the engine running, and an expression Emmerich had learned to read across gunfire. You saw my message, Tobin said. Drive to the cannery. Tobin didn't move to open the door. Boss. The person asking about that house. He hesitated, and in 11 years Emmerich had almost never seen him hesitate. It wasn't one of ours. And it wasn't Voss. Then who? Nobody knows. That's the thing. Tobin's jaw worked. Whoever it was, they stopped asking 2 days ago. Just stopped. Went quiet the same night the lamps on Varon got shot out. The rain came down on the garage roof, like something trying to get in. Drive, Emmerich said. The bridge across the river was the longest 400 meters in the city, and Emmerich had spent 6 years, never once, driving across it toward her. He watched the girders slide past the window, black ribs against a blacker sky, and made himself sit with what he was doing. There were rules. He had written them himself, in the first raw year of the marriage, when he understood that the only way to keep Cosima alive was to make her not exist. No calls from his own phones, no visits on any schedule a watcher could learn. No road between his life and hers that anyone could follow twice. When the ache to see her grew unbearable, he was permitted to drive to the mouth of Varon Lane, sit in the dark for 11 minutes, look at a green door, and leave. That was the arrangement. That was the entire architecture of how he loved her, a thing built from absences, engineered so precisely that its whole purpose was to leave no trace it existed at all. He was breaking it now, and he knew exactly what breaking it might cost. Slow at the top of the span, Emmerich said. Don't break. Just let it die down. Tobin eased off without a word. He had driven Emmerich through worse silences than this one, and he had a gift for knowing which ones were his to fill and which were not. This one, plainly, was not. He kept both hands on the wheel, and his eyes moving. Mirror, road, mirror, the way a man does when he has understood, without being told that the night has changed shape around him. Halfway across, Emmerich saw it. A sedan pulled onto the maintenance shoulder under the last of the working lights. Engine off, no hazards, a shape behind the wheel that did not move as they passed. His whole body registered it before his mind caught up. The particular stillness of a man being paid to be still. "You see him," Tobin said. "Not a question." "I see him." Emmerich turned his face away from the glass. Slow, unhurried. A man with nowhere in particular to be. Voss, wrong car for Voss, they like German. That's a fleet sedan. The kind you rent with a name that isn't yours. Tubin's eyes stayed on the mirror. He's not following. He's parked. He's watching the bridge. Which was worse. A tail could be lost. A watcher on the only bridge to Varon Lane was Annette, and Emmerich had just driven into it wearing his own face, in his own car, going the one direction that could turn a rumor about a woman by a cannery into a certainty about the wife of Emmerich Castellane. He ran the man's posture back through his memory, the way he'd run 100 faces, the loose shoulders, the coffee cup on the dash, the phone face up in the cradle. Not a shooter, a reporter. A man whose only job was to note who crossed the bridge tonight and send the names up a chain, and Emmerich had just handed him the most valuable name on the river. Every instinct he owned told him to turn around, to drive home, sit through the betrothal, seal the border, and protect her the way he always had, by staying away, by being, to her, a locked door and a monthly envelope, and a man she saw 4 times a year in rooms with the shades drawn. Distance had kept her breathing for 6 years. Distance was the discipline. Distance was love. Done the only way his world permitted. But the lamps on Varon had been shot out, and the watcher who'd been asking questions had gone quiet the same night. And somewhere under the mask he had worn since he was a boy, a much older, much simpler animal had woken up and refused to be reasoned with, and it was saying, in a voice that drowned every rule he had ever written, "Something is wrong in that house and you are going to it." "Take the service ramp past the cannery," Emmerich said. "Not the lane. Kill the lights before the turn. Then I walk." Tobin's hands flexed on the wheel. "Boss, if that man on the bridge clocked this car, walking in doesn't hide her. It just means you're on foot when they come. I know what it means. Then let me come in with you. 2 guns. No." Emmerich checked the cig at his ribs by feel, the way another man might touch a rosary. "If I'm wrong, I'm a jealous man visiting a woman, and that's a story the family can survive. If I'm right," he stopped. The bridge ended. The dark district swallowed the car. "If I'm right, I need one man outside who nobody is looking at, watching the only road in. That's you. You are the road, Tobin. Nothing crosses it. If Ludovico's people come down that lane behind me, you don't warn me, you don't wait for me. You make the road impassable, and you make it loud, so that whoever's on the bridge tells his chain the night went wrong before it went right." Tubin was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice had dropped into the flat register. Emmerich had only ever heard from him in the seconds before violence. "You've never once had me drive you here," he said. 6 years. I always figured it was a woman. I never asked whose." He cut the headlights, and the world went to shapes and shadow, and he brought the car down the cracked service ramp, toward the black bulk of the cannery, with the engine barely above a breath. 11 minutes. That's all you've ever taken, the nights you came. If you're not back in 11 minutes, I'm coming through the door, and I don't care whose face is behind it. Emmerich had his hand on the latch before the car fully stopped. "Make it 15, he said, and stepped out into the rain. The cannery district had its own weather. The rain here smelled different than it did across the river, thicker, older, carrying brine and rust, and the low, sweet rot of fish that had soaked into the brick 100 years ago and would still be there 100 years from now. Emmerich walked with his collar up and his hands loose at his sides, past the shuttered processing halls, with their broken windows like knocked-out teeth, past a chain-link fence that had been peeled back at one corner by generations of people who had somewhere to be and no right to go there. Water ran in the gutters, black and quick, carrying cigarette ends and bottle caps, and the small drowned debris of lives lived close to the bone, his shoes filled with it. He didn't slow down. He had put her here. That was the thought that walked beside him the whole way, matching him step for step. Not fate, not his enemies, not the cruelty of the world, him. He had the money to hide her anywhere. A villa on a coast with a false name. A high floor in a foreign city with a doorman who forgot faces for a living. He could have given her sunlight and gardens and mornings without fear. Instead, he had given her Varon Lane, because the first law of hiding something precious is that no one thinks to look for treasure in a place like this, and he had let that cold logic decide 6 years of her life. She had never once complained. That was the part that closed his throat. In 6 years, across every shaded room and every whispered visit, Cosima had never once asked him for a better cage, and he had let her silence stand in for consent, because it was easier than admitting what he had traded for his own peace of mind. He thought of the day he'd married her, because his mind reached for it the way a hand reaches for a rail on a dark stair, a civil office in a town 200 miles from anyone who knew his name. She had worn a plain gray dress and carried no flowers, and when the clerk asked if she understood what she was entering into, she had looked at Emmerich, at the gun she knew was under his coat, at the life she knew was under his skin, and said, "I understand it better than he does." She had been an auditor then, a woman who read other people's ledgers for a living, and found the lies buried in the arithmetic, who could look at a column of honest-seeming numbers and tell you which one was a grave. She'd had no family to speak of, no leverage. Anyone could pull a mind, like a set of surgeon's tools, and a stillness at the center of her that had reached into the noise of his life and shut it off like a hand closing over a struck bell. He had fallen for her the way empires fall, slowly and then all at once, and against every strategic interest he had. Marrying her had been the single most reckless thing Emmerich Castellane had ever done. He had spent 6 years being careful enough to make up for it, and he was beginning to understand, with every step down this rotting street, that his carefulness had never once been for her. It had been for him. It had let him keep her and keep his empire both, and call the arrangement a sacrifice instead of what it was, a convenience with her name on the bill. The lane came up on his left, and he stopped at the mouth of it, and the older animal in his chest went very still. The lamps were dead, not dark, dead. He could see, even at this distance, the pale scatter of shattered glass under each pole, the way the frosted heads had been punched out, one after another, down the length of the street. Someone had walked Varon Lane with a suppressed pistol and taken the lights, deliberately, methodically, the way you clear a room before you do the thing you came to do. The rest of the district still had its sick orange glow, sodium light bleeding off the low clouds. This one street alone had been returned to blackness, and the blackness had a shape to it, now a purpose. And Emmerich read that purpose the way Cosima read a crooked ledger. Someone had wanted no witnesses on Varon Lane, and someone had gotten their wish. He crossed to the nearest pole and crouched. The glass was old, broken already. 2 days of rain had washed it clean, settled it into the cracks of the pavement. Whatever had happened here had happened the night the watcher went silent, exactly as Tobin had said, and no one had come to fix the lights, because no one who lived on a street like this ever expected the lights to be fixed. He stood, and his knees did not want to hold him, and he made them. He had told himself, all the way here, that he was coming to look at a green door. The green door was open. Not broken. He saw that as he drew closer. moving now without sound, the cig already in his hand and low against his thigh. Not kicked in, not splintered. Open the way a door is left by someone who went in and did not bother to close it behind them, or by someone who went out fast and never came back. 4 inches of black gap between the door and the frame. Rain blowing across the threshold, onto a floor he could not see. Emmerich stood at the foot of the 2 concrete steps and listened to his own pulse and did the arithmetic he had spent his whole life doing. 19 days since he'd seen her. 2 days since the watcher went silent. 2 days of that door standing open to the rain. He had promised himself, crossing the bridge, that whatever he found he would keep his head, that he would be the cold thing his family had made him, the thing that felt nothing until the work was done. He climbed the first step and found that promise already gone, already washed out of him with the rainwater, and what was left in its place was something he had not felt since he was very young and much less dangerous. He was afraid. He put his shoulder to the green door and pushed it open into the dark. The house breathed cold air at him, and under the cold, faint and unmistakable, the copper and salt smell of blood gone tacky on a floor. Emmerich went still in the doorway with the gun up and swept the black room over the sights, and his mind reported what his eyes could barely give it: no lights. The power was gone, killed with the street. A front room, the size of a chapel, low-ceilinged, and every wall of it covered, not with pictures of a life, with paper. Sheets and sheets of it, pinned edge to edge, pale rectangles floating in the dark, like the walls of a room in a drowned building. String ran between them, corner to corner, a spider's architecture he could feel more than see. A folding table stood in the center with a laptop closed and dead on it, and a printer beside it, and stacks of banded documents squared off with the compulsive neatness of a woman who had once made her living finding other people's lies in their arithmetic. His eyes were adjusting now, pulling detail out of the black, and the detail was worse than the dark had been. The papers were not random. They were a case, bank routing slips with numbers ringed in red. Photographs, long lens, grainy, night shot of men shaking hands on a loading dock he recognized as his own, a shipping manifest, with 3 lines highlighted and a question mark beside each. A calendar page for the current month, and on it, circled twice in a hand that pressed so hard it had torn the paper, was Thursday, the day of the gathering, the day of his engagement. Someone had drawn a ring around his wedding, the way you ring the date of a funeral you already know is coming. This was not where his wife had been hiding. This was where she had been working. The understanding hit him low and hard before he had time to arrange it into something he could hold. For 6 years he had pictured her behind that green door as something small and still and waiting, a kept thing, patient in her cage, living the narrow, safe life he had purchased for her with his cowardice and called it love. He had been wrong about her in every particular. While he was measuring suits and sealing borders, Cosima had turned their marriage into a listening post. She had taken the one weapon no one could confiscate from her, that ruthless talent for finding what people bury in their books, and she had built a war room in the dark at the edge of the city, and she had aimed it. He saw now, following the strings with his eyes as they resolved out of the black. The strings all ran to one place. Every red thread on every wall converged on a single photograph pinned dead center, larger than the rest. A man lifting a glass, caught mid-toast, with a warm, dry smile Emmerich had known his entire life. His uncle Ludovico. Cosima, Emmerich said. His voice came out wrong in the empty dark, too loud, cracking on the second syllable like a boy's. Metal moved in the blackness to his right. He turned into it on pure reflex, the cig swinging his finger already taking up the slack, and stopped, every muscle locking, because the small sound he had heard was the sound of a hammer being thumbed back, and the thing pointed at his chest from the deeper shadow beside the cold hearth was the muzzle of a revolver and the hands holding it. Though they were shaking so badly the barrel drew small circles, in the dark did not lower. "Say it again," said a voice out of the black. "Ruined, cracked and scraped down to almost nothing but hers, unmistakably hers. Say my name again, and if the next word out of your mouth isn't one only, he would know I pull this trigger, and this time I won't miss. Cosima, it's me. His arm dropped. The gun hung useless at his side. He would sooner have cut off his own hand than keep it raised at her. It's Emeric, Kestrel. The word she had called him in the civil office, where they married, because he'd told her his life was a thing that hunted, and she had said then that she would marry the hawk, and not the hunt. It's your husband. I came. I broke it. I broke the whole arrangement. I drove across the bridge, with my own face on. I'm here. For a moment nothing. The rain, the dark. The shaking muzzle held on his heart by a woman who had learned, in 2 days alone in the black, to trust nothing that walked through that door. Then the word seemed to reach her from a long way off, and something in her broke all at once. The revolver dropped. A sound tore out of her that was half a sob and half a laugh and mostly pain. And Emeric was across the room before the gun hit the boards, going down to his knees, with her weight coming into his arms in a rush. And she weighed too little, so much less than the memory of her, and she was too hot, the fever coming off her skin like heat off a stone. And when he pressed his hand to her side, he felt the warmth of the wound beneath it. You're bleeding. He heard himself say it from very far away, in a voice that did not sound like the voice 2 syndicates feared. Cosima. How long have you been? 2 days. Her head rolled against his shoulder. Even now, even wrecked, the auditor's precision had not left her. She gave him the number, the way she'd once handed him a figure across a desk. The one who did the lamps came for the table. For all of this, I made the back room before he made the door, a wet, terrible ghost of a laugh. You always said I couldn't shoot. You were right. I couldn't. I put 6 rounds into that wall, and not 1 into him. But it was noise, and noise was all I had. And this street has learned that noise means someone should already have run, so he ran. He'll have told them, a woman fought back in the dark, and he didn't finish it, which means, they know I have this, which means they're coming back with more than 1 man, and better light. Why didn't you signal me? The words came out of him ragged, furious, terrified. All the things he was never allowed to be. 2 days bleeding in the dark. There are 100 ways you could have reached me. We built them, and we built every one of them together, because every one of them ran toward you. Her hand found his lapel and closed on it, and the little strength left in those fingers frightened him more than the blood had. She pulled his face down toward hers, in the black, and though her eyes were glassed with fever, he felt them find him and fix on him, sharp and certain, the way they had once found the single lying number in a column of 1,000 honest ones. If I called you here before I was sure, you'd have come the way you always come, quiet, careful, alone, and you'd have walked straight into it, and it would have looked like an accident, and no one would ever have known there was anything to grieve. I couldn't be the thread that pulled you in, so I stayed dark. I finished the work. Her breath rattled in her chest. Listen to me. Please. I don't know how long I keep the words. The wedding is not a wedding, Emeric. The border is not a border. Ludovico sold you, to the Voss, to whoever would pay the debt he's been hiding. And Thursday is not where you get married. Thursday is where you die. It's all on that table. Every number, every name, every date. 6 years. You hid me to keep me off the board. Her fingers tightened, white at the knuckle. I put myself back on it. And there is a man sitting on the bridge right now, whose whole job is to make certain that neither of us ever carries a single page of it out of this house alive. Emeric did the only thing his hands knew how to do. He got to work. He stripped off his coat and folded it into a wedge and pressed it hard against her side. And when she hissed, he did not apologize, because apology was a thing you offered when there was time. With his free hand he tore the cleanest length he could reach from the hem of his own shirt, and worked it under her binding, the wedge in place, feeling the heat of the wound come through the cloth, feeling the small, terrible flutter of her pulse where his forearm crossed her ribs, too fast, too light, a bird's heart in a cage of failing wood. "Keep talking," he told her, his voice dropping into the flat, level register he used to hold a room together while it came apart. "You don't get to stop talking. Every word is a stitch. You go quiet, I lose you. So you tell me all of it, and you tell it slow enough to breathe." "That's my line," Cosimo whispered. "I'm the one who keeps you breathing. Then teach me, Ludovico. Start there." She turned her cheek against his shoulder, and in the dark he felt more than saw her marshal herself, the auditor sorting a ruined ledger back into order by touch alone. When she spoke again, her voice had found the old cadence, the one that had walked him through 100 impossible columns of other people's lies, and even now, even here, it steadied him more than any weapon in the house. "It started with a hole," she said. "9 years ago, before you took the chair, your uncle brokered a shipment through the northern lines. It went into the river. 40 million in product. Gone. And it was his name on the arrangement, his judgment, and his fault. Your father would have taken his hand for it. So Ludovico didn't tell your father? He covered it." Her breath dragged. "You cover 40 million by borrowing 40 million. And you service that debt by selling small pieces of a thing that isn't yours to sell. A warehouse lease here, a route there, a percentage of a percentage no one audits, because no one but you reads that far into the books. For 9 years, he's been bleeding the family an ounce at a time to pay a debt no one knew existed. Slow, patient, invisible. The kind of theft you can only catch if you're the kind of person who keeps reading the ledger after everyone else has closed it." She let out a breath that might have been a laugh in a kinder life. "He didn't know your husband married one." To whom? Emmerich already knew. He wanted her to say it, because if she said it, it was proof. And if it was proof, then the thing turning to stone in his chest had a shape and a name. "To the people he sold the pieces to," she swallowed. "The Voss, Corbin, Voss, has been buying your family out from under you for 9 years. 1 invisible ounce at a time, and your uncle has been the hand that sold it. And now there's almost nothing left to sell, and one man left alive, who, if he ever read the books all the way to the bottom, would see all of it laid bare in a single afternoon." Her hand found his wrist and gripped it. "You, Emmerich. You are the last audit. The merger isn't a merger, it's the sale of the final piece, and the final piece is you." The house was silent, except for the rain and the wet, catching rhythm of her breathing. Emmerich held the wound and held her, and did not move, because if he moved, he thought he might come apart at a seam he had not known he had. He thought of 9 years of Christmases. 9 years of that unhurried laugh, the hand on his shoulder, the "your father's son." 9 years of a man kissing him on the cheek and pricing the room while he did it. "Thursday," he said. "How? Cleaner than you'd think. That's what took me so long. I kept looking for the knife, and it was never a knife." A terrible little laugh. "There's a manifest, Voss freight, routed to arrive Wednesday night, declared as banquet equipment for the gathering. Tables, linen, catering plant, except the weight's wrong. Everything on that manifest weighs half again what banquet equipment weighs, and there are 11 crates of it, and 11 is a strange number of tables for a hall that seats 60. She let the number land. "It's men and it's guns, and they're coming in through your own front gate on Wednesday, dressed as the party. And no one searches the caterers at your own engagement," Emmerich said slowly, the cold spreading. "You search the guests, you search the road, you never search the hands pouring the wine. And here is the part that kept me in this house bleeding instead of running." Her grip tightened, and for the first time her voice frayed at the edge. "Your personal detail. Your guard for Thursday. Ludovico reassigned it 3 weeks ago. Signed the roster himself. The men who'll stand at your shoulder while you toast your engagement are not your men anymore. They're his, Rennick. Palmer. The Doyle brothers. Every face you trust at your back in that hall has already been bought, or moved or replaced. And you'd never know. Because who reads a duty roster 3 weeks before a wedding? Who reads to the bottom of that page? Her voice cracked fully now. I did, and I couldn't call you, because there was no one left standing near you that I could trust to carry the message without carrying it straight to him. Emmerich closed his eyes. He saw the long hall, the portraits, the frost-colored dress, his uncle's practiced smile lifting a glass, and around the edges of that bright, familiar room, now, the shapes of men he had trusted with his life, turning. So it looks like a rival hit, he said, hearing his own voice come from very far off. The Voss men do it dressed as staff. My own reassigned detail stands down or turns. A cutout family takes the blame. Ludovico survives, grieving, and steps into the chair to hold the family together in its hour of loss. A chair that's already been sold, a family that's already gone, and no one alive who can read the books and prove it. He inherits a corpse and calls it a rescue. That's it. That's the whole 9 years, in one night. Her grip on his wrist was failing. Now, the strength going out of her fingers by degrees. And it frightened him more than anything she had said. I have every page, the debt, the routing, the manifest, the roster, with his signature. It ends, Himeric, it ends all of it. But only if it walks out of this house. And there is a man on the bridge whose entire job tonight is to make sure it never does. Then it walks out. He shifted, gathering her up. Merrick can be at the mill house in 20 minutes. We move now. We, Merrick. Her voice stopped him. Not the volume. There was no volume left. But something underneath it. There's a reason I did it alone. And it isn't only that the signals ran toward you. In the dark, her fevered eyes found his and held. And for the first time, since he'd pushed through the green door, he heard her afraid, not of the Voss, not of dying, of him. I need you to know it before we walk out that door, because after we walk out that door there won't be time. And I have spent 6 years being the thing you could put down and pick up when the world let you. I did this because I would rather die with the proof in my hand than spend 1 more year being a secret you were careful about. Her breath shook. I'm not asking you to love me in the light. I stopped asking for that a long time ago. I'm telling you I'm done living in the dark to make your life convenient. Cancel the wedding or don't. Take the proof or burn it. But I will not go back to Varon Lane. Not ever. I would rather be dead in the open than alive in a box. The words went into him like the cold had, like the blood had, and lodged somewhere under everything the family had built him to be. For 6 years, he had told himself the arrangement was the great sacrifice of his life. Sitting on the floor of her war room, with her blood soaking through his coat, he understood at last that the sacrifice had only ever been hers, that he had bought his empire and his peace of mind with her years and her sunlight, and called himself noble for the ache it cost him, and that she had known. With that mind, that found the grave in the column of honest numbers, she had known exactly what the arrangement was, and stayed, and loved him anyway, and finally decided she would rather be shot in the open than kept safe as a thing. Cosima, he said. And there was nothing of the boss in it, nothing of the chair or the family or the empire, only the man from the civil office 200 miles from anyone. You were never a thing I put down. You were the only thing I was ever afraid to lose. And I hid you because I am a coward about exactly one subject in the whole world. And it is you. I'm done being a coward about you. And then, out in the dead black street, an engine turned over. Low, deliberate, the sound of a heavy vehicle rolling onto Varon Lane with its lights off. And a second engine answered it. And Emmerich's phone buzzed against his chest. One short pulse. Tobin's signal. The one they'd agreed meant only one thing. They were here. Emmerich moved, and 6 years of grief and guilt burned off him in a single breath, and what was left was the thing the family had actually made. Not the cold negotiator, not the careful husband, but the animal that had woken on the bridge, and it was very calm, and it was very fast. How many ways out of this house? 2. Cosima was already dragging herself upright against him, jaw set, the auditor overriding the fever by main force. The green door. And a coal hatch in the back room, floor level, opens on the alley behind the cannery wall. It's how I've come and gone for 6 years. Nobody knows it's there, not even you. The table. He was scanning the walls, the paper, and the laptop. We can't carry the walls. The walls are copies. Everything that matters is on that drive, she pointed. And he saw the small black rectangle beside the dead laptop. And there's a second, encrypted, that I mailed to a lockbox the day I got shot, in case I didn't make it. But if we walk out with the drive, and they take us on the alley, it's over. We need them to believe it burned with the house. Emmerich was already pulling the accelerant, a can of lamp oil, because a house with no power still needs to see, from beside the cold hearth where she'd stockpiled it, and he understood, in a flash of black clarity, that she had planned this too, this exact moment that she had laid in the means to erase her own war room the instant it stopped being useful. She had thought of everything except being carried out alive. She had built the fire to cover her own death, not her escape. The knowledge went through him like a blade and came out the other side as something harder than grief. At the front of the house, the fist came against the green door again, heavier, now a shoulder behind it, testing the latch she'd left unlocked to sell the story of a woman who'd fled. A voice said, "Slow, slow. She's got a gun, and she's already used it once." Another said, "She's had 2 days to bleed. She's not using anything." They were right. They were also about to be wrong about which woman they were dealing with. "Give me the drive." She pressed it into his palm. He zipped it into the breast of his shirt against his skin, over his heart, where nothing short of killing him would take it. "When we're through the hatch, I light it." They come in the green door and find a fire, and a room full of ash, and a story that ends, a woman who was digging where she shouldn't, and paid for it, and burned with what she found. Ludovico sleeps easy. And we walk into Thursday, holding the one thing he's certain no longer exists. Cosima's fevered eyes came up to his, and for the first time that night something in them was not afraid. "You're not canceling the wedding," she said slowly, reading him the way she read everything. "You're going to it. I'm going to it." He got an arm under her knees and lifted her, and she weighed nothing, and it enraged him the way it had at the door, how small a space she took while carrying the whole weight of his survival. 6 years, I kept you invisible to keep you alive, and invisible almost got you killed in the dark, where no one would have known to mourn you. So, we're done being invisible. Ludovico built a room where I stand up in front of every soul who matters in this city and get shot as a rival's revenge. Fine, we'll use his room. He carried her toward the black mouth of the back hall, toward the coal hatch and the alley and the fire that would sell their deaths. "But when I stand up in that hall on Thursday, you're going to be standing next to me in the light, where the whole family can see exactly who you are. And every man in that room who was paid to end Emmerich Castellane is going to have to try it in front of his wife." He set her down by the low iron hatch. Down the front of the house, on the far side of the war room wall, the shoulder hit the green door hard enough to crack the old wood, once, twice. "The card," Cosima breathed, working the hatch bolt with shaking fingers. "There has to be a card, a place card at the head table, so when they look up and see me, they know it was chosen. It was mine. I wasn't dragged there. You'll write it yourself." He hauled the hatch open onto wet night air and the reek of the alley. "In your own hand. So there's exactly one object in that hall no one at the estate can explain, and only I will know what it means. And by the time anyone else understands it, it will already be too late for all of them." He went through the hatch, first into the alley, gun up, and found it empty. They'd all gone to the front, to the green door, exactly as she'd said they would. Behind him, he heard the wood finally give, the green door bursting inward, boots on the boards of the room they'd just left. He reached back through the hatch and drew her out into the dark and the rain and she struck a match one-handed against the iron lip of the hatch, and for half a second the little flame lit her face. Hollow and fevered and absolutely certain, the face of a woman setting fire to 6 years of her own careful, invisible work without a moment's hesitation, and she touched it to the oil-soaked rag, trailing back into the house, and the flame ran inward like a live thing. From inside a shout. Then the soft, enormous exhale of a room full of lamp oil, finding its purpose, and light bloomed orange in the war room windows, and men who had come to collect a drive found themselves backing out of a house that was suddenly full of smoke and light. Then Tobin was there at the mouth of the alley, low and fast, shotgun tucked tight, eyes going wide for half a second at the woman in Emmerich's arms before the professional in him swallowed it whole. 2 vehicles, 4 men at the front. They haven't made the alley. Behind them, the fire took hold and climbed, and the whole dead street was lit now in shuddering orange. "Boss, who?" "My wife," Emmerich said, and watched the word go through Tobin like a current and did not slow down for it. "Her name is Cosima. She's been holding the family together for 6 years and none of you knew she existed. Get the car. We're taking her to Marek," and then Tobin. He was already moving, the burning house throwing their shadows long across the wet brick. "Then you and I are going to plan a wedding." Marek worked on her for 2 hours in the back bedroom of the mill house, and Emmerich stood at the foot of the bed the entire time and did not sit down once. The mill house was the one property Emmerich owned under a name 3 shells deep, a low stone place at the edge of the water meadows that appeared on no roster, in no ledger, and nothing his uncle had ever been permitted to see. He had bought it the year he married her, and never told her it existed, because a man who hides a wife learns to hide everything. And standing here now, watching a doctor thread a drain into her side by the light of a battery lantern, he understood that his secrecy had been a disease he'd mistaken for a discipline. He had compartmentalized her into a grave. He would spend whatever life he had left, refusing to do it again. The graves reopened, and the wounds infected. But she's young and she's stubborn, and the stubborn is doing most of the work, Merrick said, stripping his gloves. He was a spare, gray man who had sewn Emmerich's people shut in worse rooms than this and asked fewer questions than any man alive. "Fever's already turning. Another day in that house, and I'd be having a different conversation with you. Whoever she is, she decided not to die. I just did the paperwork." He packed his bag. "She needs a week. You'll give her a night. I've stopped pretending I can change that about the people in your life." "I'll give her a night," Emmerich agreed, "because she won't take more. If I chained her to that bed, she'd audit the chain and find a flaw in it by morning." That earned him the ghost of a smile from the man, which was more than most people got. "Then she's better suited to you than the one they've got picked out," Marek said, and hefted his bag. He paused at the door, and something almost gentle crossed his tired face. "Though I'd guess from your face, she's the reason you've been a slightly less frightening man these 6 years than your father was. Get some rest, Emmerich. You look like the one who got shot when he was gone." Emmerich sat at last on the edge of the mattress, and Cosima's hand found his in the lantern light, and for a while neither of them said anything at all. The rain had stopped. Somewhere out over the meadows a bird was making the first uncertain sounds of a morning that had no business coming. "Say it again," she murmured. Her voice was still ruined, but the fever glass had gone out of her eyes, and what looked out at him now was clear and level and entirely herself. "The thing you said to Tobin in the alley. I thought I dreamed it. My wife." He turned her hand over in his and pressed his mouth to the inside of her wrist, over the burned scar he had never once let himself ask about. "I said, my wife, and I'm going to keep saying it in every room that matters, until the word stops costing you anything to hear." Her breath hitched, and she looked away, at the stone wall, at the lantern, at anything but him. The auditor caught, for once, without a column to hide the truth in. "Careful," she said thickly. I've built a whole self out of not needing you to. It doesn't come apart quietly, then it can come apart loud. We're done with quiet. He tightened his hand on hers. For a moment he let himself simply look at her. The sharp cheekbones, the fever had carved sharper, the split lip. The 6 years of a life he had only ever visited, stitched into the exhausted lines of her face. And he thought that he had never in his life seen anything he wanted so badly to keep in the light. Now, tell me how we live through Thursday, because you've had 2 days in a war room, and I've had 2 hours in a doctor, and I already know you have a plan. She did have a plan. Of course, she had a plan. But before she could speak it, Tobin knocked twice and put his head in, and his face was doing the thing it did when the night had changed shape again. Boss, someone's at the meadow gate. Alone? Hands where I can see them. Been standing in the open for 10 minutes so we'd know they came to talk. He hesitated. It's the Voss girl, Renata. Every muscle in Emmerich's body went to stone. Impossible! No one knows this house exists. She knows this one, Cosima said quietly, and there was something in her voice. Not fear, but the grim satisfaction of a number that had finally come out even. Let her in. She's the last page, Emmerich. I couldn't be sure until she came to you herself. At his look, she almost smiled. Who do you think mailed my second drive to a lockbox when I was too shot to reach a post office? Who do you think has been feeding me the reassigned guard roster for 3 weeks? I didn't build this case alone. I had a woman on the inside who wants out of that family more than I want out of the dark. I've never met her in person. We've never once been in a room together. Everything we built through a lockbox and a burner and a great deal of trust neither of us could afford. Tonight's the first time I'll see her face, her fingers closed on his. Don't let yours give anything away. She spent her whole life reading rooms too. Renata came in out of the gray dawn, with rain in her dark hair and her composure worn down to the bone, and she looked at Emmerich, and then she looked past him at the woman in the bed, and something in her face loosened, relief, raw and unguarded, the first honest thing Emmerich had ever seen her feel. You lived, Renata said to Cosima, and her voice cracked on it. The fire was on every scanner by midnight. Ludovico told my father the problem burned. I sat at that dinner and toasted it. She pressed the back of her hand to her mouth, gathered herself, turned to Emmerich with the frost sliding back over the grief. You should know what you're marrying into on Thursday, since I doubt anyone's told you the whole of it. My father isn't giving me to you. He's making me your widow. The plan was never for me to have a husband. It was for me to have your name in your ports the morning after they carry you out of that hall. I've known for a month. A daughter is just another asset on a Voss balance sheet. And I found out exactly what column I'd been filed under. Her jaw set, and the old cold precision Emmerich had mistaken for her whole character showed itself now for what it had always been: armor, worn by someone with a great deal underneath it, worth protecting. I've been trying to burn it down for a month, and the only person in this city who'd listen to a Voss was a dead woman, living over the water in a house with a green door. Why? Emmerich said. Why risk everything? To warn a man you were raised to help destroy. Renata looked at him for a long moment. Because I have spent 29 years being spent, she said simply. And your wife is the first person who ever wrote to me, like I was a person and not a price. You don't forget that. You'd be amazed what someone will burn down for the first person who treats them like they're real. She turned back to Cosima, and her voice dropped. I can get her into that hall. I can get your real men into the catering staff. I can put every one of Ludovico's crates on a list in your hand by tonight. But I need you to understand the price of the plan she and I built, Emmerich, because it's steep, and it's not mine to pay, and I hate it. What price? Emmerich said. Renata looked at Cosima. Cosima looked at Emmerich, and did not flinch. I go in first, Cosima said, alone as staff, hours before you arrive. It's the only way past. Ludovico's men. They'll be watching every guest and every one of your soldiers. but nobody counts the woman refilling the water. I'll be inside that trap, on my feet, wounded, for 3 hours, before you ever walk through the door. Her hand tightened on his. And when it's time, I'll walk up to the head table, and I'll set down a place card in my own hand, and I'll sit in the chair meant for your bride. That's the signal, that's the moment your men move. And that's the moment I stop being your secret, standing in a room full of men paid to make sure I never existed. The morning came up gray and total over the meadows. No, Emmerich said. You don't get to say no anymore, said his wife, and smiled at him. And it was the smile of a woman who had already priced her own life and found it at last worth spending in the open. That was always the deal, Kestrel. I married the hawk, not the cage. The long hall of the Castellane estate had been dressed for a wedding that everyone in it believed was a funeral, and only 3 people knew whose. Emmerich came through the great doors at 9, in the charcoal suit the tailor had fitted over his holster, with Tobin at his shoulder, and a smile on his face that reached nowhere near his eyes. 60 guests turned. Crystal caught the light of 100 candles. His uncle stood at the head of the room beneath the portraits of men who had died badly, warm and dry and beaming, a glass already in his hand. And behind him, along the walls, in the black and white of catering staff, stood the men who had arrived Wednesday night in 11 crates that weighed too much. Emmerich counted them the way Cosima had taught him to count anything that lied. 11. He let his smile widen and embraced his uncle and felt the shape of a pistol under the old man's dinner jacket and thought, you wore it to your own party. You didn't even trust the men you bought. Corbin Voss crossed the room with Renata on his arm, frost-colored and flawless and white to the lips, and shook Emmerich's hand and called him son. Renata's eyes met Emmerich's for a quarter of a second and slid away. Everyone was in place. The trap was perfect. Every soul in that hall was exactly where they had been told to stand, except the woman refilling the water. She had been on her feet for 3 hours. Emmerich had made himself not look for her, and failed, and found her at the edge of the room in staff black, with her hair scraped back and a pitcher in her steady hands. And no one, not his uncle, not Corbin, not 11 paid killers, scanning every guest and every soldier. No one had looked twice at the pale, tired woman doing the quiet work at the margins of the powerful, because that was the whole architecture of how the world had always failed to see Cosima, and tonight it would be the last mistake a great many of them ever made. Ludovico rose to toast. He tapped his glass. The hall went soft and expectant. 9 years ago, he began, warm, expansive, I made my brother a promise over his grave that I would keep this family whole, that I would see his son safe into the chair, and safe into a marriage, and safe into the future. He did not live to. Cosima set down the pitcher. She crossed the open floor without hurry, a woman with somewhere to be, and the room did not register her until she reached the head table and sat down. Beside the bride's untouched plate, a small white place card, written in a hand that leaned the way only one hand in the world had ever leaned, and pulled out the chair meant for Renata Voss, and sat. Ludovico stopped talking. Emmerich watched it hit his uncle in stages, the way ruin arrives, the flicker of a man who doesn't recognize a face, then the deeper flicker of a man who recognizes it from a description, in a report about a house that was supposed to have burned, then the final total stillness of a man doing arithmetic and arriving, for the first time in 9 years, at a number he cannot cover. Uncle, Emmerich said into the silence, and his voice carried to every corner of the hall, the way it did right before a room caught fire. Finish the toast. You were telling them how you kept us whole. He set his own glass down untasted. Tell them about the 40 million in the river. Tell them about the 9 years. Tell them who's been buying my family. 1 invisible ounce at a time. He's sitting at your right hand. He brought his daughter as the receipt. He turned to the room, and, from inside his jacket, he drew not the gun, but a single folded page, and let them see it. Everything my uncle sold, every crate that came in Wednesday. Every name on the guard roster he reassigned 3 weeks ago. My wife spent 6 years reading the books all the way to the bottom. Her name is Cosima Castellane. And she is the reason none of you are about to watch what you were brought here to watch. The 11 moved. They were fast, professional, and they had been told to expect a room full of soft guests and one target. And instead, the 12 catering staff nearest them were Americ's own men in borrowed black, positioned by a roster Renata had rewritten, and the thing that had been dressed as a party became in the space of a breath the fastest and quietest violence the old hall had ever held. It was not the loud, sprawling gunfight of a lesser night. Emeric's men had the angles. They had the drop. They had spent the evening standing beside the men they were about to disarm, close enough to move before a single Voss shooter cleared a weapon above the tablecloths. A shout. A chair going over. A woman guest crying out once and then clapping both hands over her own mouth. In 11 seconds it was over. The 11 subdued and stripped of their weapons on the marble, and the candles were still burning, and the old portraits looked down on a room that had finally caught up to them. Corbin Voss came out of his chair, with a pistol already in his hand, and found Renata's hand on his wrist, and Renata's face an inch from his, white and shaking, and done. "No," she said to her father. "No, I am not your receipt." He struck her. Emmerich started forward. He was too slow, and he did not need to be fast, because Tobin was already there, and the shotgun's flat black barrel came to rest under Corbin Voss's jaw, and the old man went very still, with his daughter's blood on his knuckles, and his own ruin standing over him in a borrowed apron. Which left Ludovico. He had not moved. He had not run. He stood at the head of his brother's hall with his hands empty at his sides, and looked at Emmerich with an expression Emmerich had never seen on him. Not warmth, not the good dry laugh, but the naked, exhausted face of a man who has carried a weight alone for 9 years and is, in some terrible corner of himself, relieved to set it down. "They forced me," Ludovico said. The old reflex, reaching for the old tool, the Voss, the debt. "Emmerich, you don't understand what it is to carry a family's whole survival on." "Stop." Emmerich crossed to him. He did not raise the gun. He wanted for this, to have his hands free. "You didn't do it for the family. Cosima found the debt, uncle. She found the river, and the 9 years, and every ounce. But do you know what she couldn't find? A single year, where you tried to tell me one conversation. One night, you came to me and said, 'I made a mistake, help me carry it.'" He was close now, close enough to see the old man's eyes. "There was never a night like that. Because it was never about the debt. My father stood over both of us our whole lives and chose me. And you have spent 9 years selling his son to a rival, one piece at a time, and telling yourself it was survival, when the truest thing you ever felt was that it should have been you in this chair. He let that land, and watched it land, and saw that it was true. You didn't sell me to save the family, you sold the family to punish me. That's the toast, uncle. That's the whole 9 years." In one sentence, Ludovico's hand moved. It moved fast, faster than an old man's hand should, going for the pistol he'd worn to his own party, and Emmerich saw it and knew, in the frozen fraction before he could bring his own gun up, that he was going to be a half-second late. He was not late. A shot cracked flat across the hall, and Ludovico's hand opened, and his pistol dropped to the marble, and he looked down, with an expression of profound surprise, at the dark stains spreading across his shoulder, and then he turned, and everyone turned, to the woman standing at the head table, with a small revolver, held in 2 steady hands. The one she'd carried out of a burning house, the one she'd emptied into a wall in the dark and sworn she couldn't aim. "I've been practicing," Cosima said. By morning, the estate belonged to different people than it had the night before, though the portraits on the walls had not changed and the candles had only just burned down. They had not killed Corbin Voss. Emmerich had wanted to in the flat cold hour after the hall went quiet, with Renata's blood still on the old man's knuckles. But Cosima had put a page in front of him instead of letting him settle it with a gun in front of everyone. Because that was the difference between them and always had been, and it was the difference that would keep them alive. The page was a schedule of 9 years of transfers, and Emeric read Corbin, his own theft, back to him line by line in the grey light of the emptied hall. And by the end of it, Corbin Voss understood that he was not going to die, and understood, too, that it would have been kinder if he had. "You spent 9 years buying a corpse," Emeric told him. "Every ounce my uncle sold you was a piece of a family that would have burned it all before it let you keep one crate. It's documented. It's notarized. Copies exist in places you will never find, held by people you cannot reach, set to open in rooms you very much do not want them opened in. The day anything happens to me, or to her, or to your daughter." He slid a pen across the table. "The northern lines come back to us at the price you paid. Your men are gone from my city by dark, and Renata is free, of the marriage, of the debt of you. You will sign this, and you will fly home to whatever's left of your holdings up the coast, and you will spend the rest of your life being the man who almost owned the river, and instead handed his daughter the pen that ended him. Or you can refuse. And I open the rooms today." Corbin signed. His hand shook the way Cosima's had shaken in the dark, and Emeric felt nothing watching it, and that was fine, because he had spent all the feeling he owned on someone worth it. Ludovico he did not kill either, and that was the crueler thing, and both of them knew it. He gathered the family, the real family, the capos and cousins, and the old blood who had believed for 9 years that Ludovico was the last honest hand on the wheel, and he laid Cosima's case in front of them, every page. And he let his uncle stand in the middle of the room he had wanted his whole life, and watch the men who loved him read exactly what he was. There is no death worse for a man like Ludovico than to be fully known and left alive. Emeric put him out, no chair, no name, no protection, no bullet, into a city where everyone would now know his face and what was behind it. "You wanted to be seen," Emeric said at the door. He never learned where his uncle went. He found, to his mild surprise, that he never once cared to. Renata, he did not exile, or dictate to, or price. She stood in the emptied hall in the grey morning with a bruise blooming where her father's hand had been, a woman who had just set fire to the only life she'd ever been allowed. And Emeric did the one thing no one in her family had ever done for her. He asked her what she wanted. She thought about it for a long time, as though the question were in a language she was still learning. "A door," she finally said. "One that locks from my side, and a name that isn't on anyone's balance sheet." He gave her both, and a stake in the northern lines she had helped him win back, and the freedom to be, for the first time in 29 years, an asset on no one's books but her own. It was, Cosima observed later, the best return he'd ever gotten on a single honest question. And then it was only the two of them, in the pale, enormous quiet of the morning after. In the master suite, Cosima had never been permitted to enter in 6 years of marriage. She stood at the tall window in one of his shirts, watching the light come up over the river and the terminals and, past them, the dark smudge of the cannery district, where a house on Varon Lane was a wet, black ruin, and she did not turn when he came in. He crossed to her. He stood at her back, the way he'd stood behind her at the war room table, and this time he did not keep the professional inch between them, because there was no such thing anymore. "I have carried something for 6 years," Emeric said. "I want to give it to you in the light." She turned then. And he took from his pocket the thin, worn band of gold he had held against his hip every day for 6 years, and never once let touch his hand in front of another living soul. The ring he had put on her finger in a civil office, 200 miles from anyone, and then made her take off at the door, because a hidden wife could not wear a wedding ring. Because the very proof of her was a danger to her, because he had loved her in the only cowardly shape his world allowed. He took her hand. It was steady now. The fever was gone. "I made you take this off 6 years ago," he said, and his voice was not steady at all. And I told myself it was to keep you alive. And it was. And it was also the single cruelest thing I have ever done. And I have done a great many cruel things. I am not going to ask you to forgive it. I'm going to ask you to wear it. In every room, in front of every soul who matters in this city. Where the whole world can see exactly who you are. He slid it onto her finger, and this time no one made her take it off, and no one ever would again. You were never my secret, Cosima. You were the only true thing I ever managed to keep. I just kept you in the dark. I'm done keeping anything in the dark. Cosima looked down at the ring, at the band of gold catching the first real sunlight it had ever been allowed to hold. And when she looked up, her eyes were wet and clear and entirely formidably awake. I ran the numbers on you a long time ago, she said. The night in the civil office, I knew exactly what I was buying and exactly what it would cost, and I bought it anyway. And I have never once wanted a refund. She pressed her ringed hand flat against his chest, over the steady hammer of his heart, the way she had once pressed a lying number under her thumb. I don't want a villa. I don't want the sunlight you feel so guilty about. I want the books, Emmerich, all of them. I want a chair at the table and my name on the door, and every soul in this family to know that the woman refilling the water read them to the bottom and saved every one of their lives. A slow, dangerous, wonderful smile. I didn't marry the hawk to sit in a nest. I married him to hunt, then hunt, said Emmerich Castellane, and pulled his wife into the light, and did not let her go. The secret had never been the shame. It had been the shape of a man too frightened to let the best thing in his life be seen. Cosima had lived 6 years in the dark to keep him breathing. She would spend the rest of her life at the head of the table in full view of everyone, and the whole city would learn the thing Ludovico had learned too late, in a hall full of candles. That the quiet one at the margins, the one nobody counts, is very often the one holding the entire world in her steady, unregarded hands. Emmerich didn't just walk into the trap set at his own wedding. He turned it into the moment he finally dragged the woman he loved out of the shadows and into her rightful place at the head of the table. For 6 years he thought hiding Cosima was how he kept her safe, when really he was just keeping her small. And it took a room full of men paid to end him to make him see that the quiet auditor by the water had been holding his entire empire together with 2 steady hands and a mind nobody bothered to fear. That's the kind of slow-burn loyalty and hard-won devotion we live for on this channel, the ones the world overlooks turning out to hold all the power. If this dark, twisting story pulled you all the way to the end, do me a favor, hit that like button, subscribe, and share it with someone who loves a mafia romance where the underestimated one comes out on top. And tell me in the comments, what was your favorite moment? The war room in the dark? The place card at the head table? Or Cosima proving, with one steady shot, that she was never the one who needed protecting? Drop it below. I read every one, and I'll see you in the next story.